In the heart of America, in a town enveloped in an almost surreal calm, stood a house that could have been the dream of any family. A luxurious home, with large windows overlooking a manicured garden and a facade that shone under the sun's rays as if it had always been there, waiting for its new owners. This was the new home of the Harrison family, who had recently moved in search of a new beginning, away from the hustle and bustle of the big city. The neighbors, the McGreens, did not take kindly to the arrival of the Harrisons. There was something in their looks, a mix of curiosity and disapproval, that made the newcomers feel as if they were intruders in a world to which they did not belong. The Harrisons, however, decided not to dwell on those first impressions and focused on their new life. But the tranquility of their existence was soon shattered. Every night, unsettling noises echoed from the basement. Heavy footsteps, like those of adults moving with deliberate slowness, and the sound of objects being moved without any apparent logic. At first, the Harrisons thought it was the fruit of their imagination, or perhaps just adjusting to the new house. But when the noises became a constant, impossible to ignore, they went down to check, finding each time the basement exactly as they had left it, empty, silent, waiting. Concerned, the Harrisons decided to talk to their neighbors, hoping to find some explanation. But their questions were met with evasive looks and vague answers. "No, never heard anything like that," was the common response, until rumors of a supposed haunting that enveloped the house began to spread. These stories, whispered with a mix of fear and fascination, spoke of dark presences, poltergeists, evil spirits that loved to haunt places and that had found refuge in the basement, remaining hidden from the eyes of the living. Desperate yet fascinated by these legends, the Harrisons decided to install hidden cameras in the basement. What they discovered in the recordings left them speechless. Two figures, a man and a woman, emerged from the night shadows to dance among the old furniture and boxes, moving objects in an apparently random manner, but always with the precise intention, as if following a ritual only known to them. Convinced they finally had proof, the Harrisons handed over the videos to the local authorities, who quickly identified the mysterious figures. They appeared to be the McGreens. The arrest of the neighbors seemed to bring the much-desired peace. That night, for the first time since they had moved in, the Harrisons slept undisturbed by the noises coming from the basement. But the calm was short-lived. The following night, the noises resumed, more intense than ever. Reviewing the camera footage, the Harrisons were struck with an icy terror upon seeing the same figures moving around the basement. It hadn't been the McGreens who had disturbed their peace, but someone else, someone who had continued to hide in the shadows. The investigation intensified, revealing an even more disconcerting truth. The culprits of the disturbances were other neighbors, people with whom the Harrisons had never had direct contact. Interrogated, they confessed to acting out of envy, consumed by the desire to own the house that they now saw slipping from their hands. "If we couldn't have it, then no one should," they admitted with a mix of anger and despair. The threat left the Harrisons with a sense of unease they couldn't shake off. As they drove home, exactly 2 days later, they placed a "for sale" sign outside the house. Strangely, they received a call from an interested buyer, a stranger of Italian nationality moving to the country for the first time. With the Italian buyer, they had not shared the full truth of what they had experienced, perhaps to protect themselves and the new owner from the anguish that had consumed their days and nights, or perhaps because they feared no one would believe the complexity and depth of the terror they had just faced. "Good luck," they said with a smile that tried to hide the tension, as they handed over the keys and moved away, hoping that the new beginning would be kinder to the next guardian of that house. The reaction of the neighbors, watching from behind the windows, added a final layer of melancholy to their departure. The Harrisons couldn't help but wonder if those hidden figures behind the curtains had been complicit in the torment they had lived through, or merely spectators of a tragedy that had unfolded too close to home. The sight of the neighbors, now watching both of them and the new owner, a man who with broad gestures greeted a life that was about to begin, made them reflect on how similar all the intentions of the neighborhood were. In the heart of Vermont, a region renowned for its verdant hills and breathtaking landscapes, there stood a house that, at first glance, seemed to have sprung from an architectural catalog. Perched atop one of the many hills that characterized the local scenery, near the quaint town of Stowe, this dwelling stood out for its beauty and privileged position, offering unparalleled views of the surrounding valleys. The Johnson family, consisting of Michael and Sarah with their 3 children, Emily, Alex, and little Joshua, had always dreamed of moving to a new place like this. When they finally found the listing for this house, they didn't hesitate to seize the opportunity. The property, in addition to the main house, included a large plot of land and a private forest that promised endless adventures for the children. However, as soon as they settled in, inexplicable events began to occur, turning their dream into a nightmare. Joshua, the youngest and most sensitive of the siblings, was the first to notice something odd. Every night, while the house seemed enveloped in silence, he perceived noises coming from the basement. Light footsteps, sighs, and sometimes even incomprehensible whispers. Driven by curiosity and a certain dose of childish bravery, Joshua descended several times to investigate, but each time he turned on the light, the noises abruptly ceased, leaving him alone with his rapidly beating heart. His stories of dark shadows and mysterious sounds were regularly ridiculed by family members, who attributed his experiences to an overactive imagination. Everyone except Alex, the older brother, who began to seriously worry about the well-being of the little one. Determined to prove that Joshua was not making it up, one evening, Alex accompanied him to the basement. "Show yourselves, if you're really there," Alex challenged, trying to mask his anxiety with a tone of defiance, but the only response was silence. Just as they were about to retrace their steps, convinced it was all a figment of Joshua's imagination, they suddenly enveloped in a chilling cold, shaking their certainties. A shadow materialized before them, not black as Joshua had described, but a pale, almost transparent white. Its gaze was filled with an intensity that went beyond mere malevolence. It was as if it carried the weight of countless dark secrets. "You must leave," it said with a voice that seemed an echo from another world. "This house is ours." The 2 brothers, frightened but determined to find an explanation, shared the experience with the rest of the family. Initially, their words were met with skepticism. However, Alex's discovery on the internet changed everything. Their new home had been built on an ancient cemetery, long forgotten but never truly gone. Research revealed that many of the graves had been neglected when the land was redeveloped, leaving the remains under the house. Even Sarah, who had until then maintained a rational attitude, began to notice unsettling phenomena. Moving in the living room mirror when no one was present, feelings of being watched, and objects that changed places without explanation. The episode that convinced even the most skeptical of the Johnsons, Michael, occurred one evening, when, armed with a flashlight, he descended into the basement to confront what he still believed to be an invasion of wild animals. Instead of small rodents, he found himself face to face with the black shadow, so dense it seemed solid. "I warned you, son," it whispered with a grave voice. "If you don't leave this house, the torment you will suffer here will only be the beginning." Without hesitation, the Johnson family decided to leave the house immediately. They gathered their most precious belongings and, in a frenetic escape, abandoned the dwelling on the hill, vowing to never return. The house remained empty, a silent monument to a forgotten past and untold stories, as the Johnson family sought to rebuild their lives, far from the supernatural events that had disturbed their existence. Despite the house being back on the real estate market, few approached the property, and rumors of its previous tenants and their hasty departures discouraged potential buyers. It was said that someone had made an offer, but no news was confirmed. The house on the hill still stands there, silent and imposing, overlooking the town below. Anyone daring to approach, even out of curiosity, cannot help but feel an invisible gaze resting upon them, a warning not to disturb the ancient guardians of that place. In a quaint neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York, an old brick building proudly stood amidst the bustling streets of daily life. On the ground floor, a lady named Agnes, with her watchful eyes and ample time on her hands since she was retired, had been observing the comings and goings of her neighbors for years, becoming an unofficial guardian of the building. Kevin, a lively 8-year-old boy with an immense passion for model cars, lived on the 4th floor with his family. Every day after returning from school, he would rush down the stairs with his bicycle, heading to the basement to store it. Agnes, who had taken a liking to the young tenant, often watched him from her ground floor window, noting, with a smile, the care and attention Kevin devoted to each of his toys. One late summer evening, Kevin's father asked him to go down to the basement to put away the bicycle, as usual. As Kevin inserted the key into his family's compartment, he noticed something unusual: a carefully wrapped package with "For Kevin" written on it. Surprised and excited, he immediately thought it was an unexpected gift. He opened the package and found an incredibly detailed model car inside, accompanied by a note, "Dear child, this is for you. Have your father open the car doors." Thrilled, Kevin ran to his father, showing him the gift and the note. The father, with a mix of curiosity and caution, opened the car doors, but it was pricked by several smaller pins hidden inside. Initially, it seemed like a minor accident, but those pins were anything but ordinary. In the following days, Kevin's father began to exhibit worrying symptoms: high fever, irrational behaviors, and unusual neglect towards the family. He, who had always been a model and attentive father. The situation worsened when, in a fit of madness, he demanded to remove all the crucifixes from the house, with a tone of voice so altered it seemed not his own. The wife, frightened and confused by this drastic change, refused, sparking a violent argument. It was in that moment that Kevin, entering the room, asked his father why he was acting so strangely. The look he received in response was full of incomprehensible hatred, a veiled threat that forced him to take refuge in his room. The next morning, driven by anguish and despair, Kevin and his mother went to church to seek help. The priest, listening to their story, immediately sensed that something dark had taken possession of the man. Leveraging Kevin's account of the model car and the black pins, he concluded that it was a work of black magic. After advising Kevin and his mother not to return home, the priest organized an exorcism to free the father from that curse. Meanwhile, the police investigation, starting from the family's testimonies and the fingerprints found on the package, led to Agnes. Interrogated, she confessed to acting out of revenge, driven by a deep unhappiness caused by her inability to have children, and wanted to strike at Kevin's family for the pain their happiness caused her. The story of Kevin and his family quickly spread throughout the Brooklyn neighborhood, becoming a warning about jealousy and uncontrolled hatred that can nestle even in the most unsuspecting hearts. The old brick building, a silent witness to so many lives, now also enclosed this dark chapter, a reminder of human fragility and the destructive power of malevolence. In the vibrant city of New Orleans, Louisiana, renowned for its cultural heritage, the jazz music resonating through the streets, and the voodoo legends enveloping every corner, stood an ancient building in the heart of the French Quarter. This palace, with a facade that told stories of bygone eras, concealed within it a basement few dared to explore. Legend has it that, during the city's darkest years, this basement was used for voodoo rituals, leaving indelible marks of magic and mystery within its walls. Despite the passage of time, residents and visitors claim to still hear unsettling sounds and whispered voices emanating from the depths of the earth, especially on full moon nights. Thomas and Marie, a young couple fascinated by paranormal stories, decided to move into this building, drawn by its dark reputation. Their curiosity was boundless, and as soon as they had the chance, they descended into the basement to discover what truly lay beneath their new home. The cellar was a labyrinth of narrow, low corridors, with exposed brick walls that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. As they explored, the couple was enveloped by a cold sensation that seemed to have no natural source. Their footsteps echoed too loudly in the oppressive silence, and the air grew heavier as they ventured deeper. At one point, Thomas noticed something strange on one of the walls, a series of engraved symbols reminiscent of those used in voodoo rituals. As he tried to decipher them, a female voice, sweet yet unsettling, began to whisper incomprehensible words. Marie, frightened, insisted on turning back, but Thomas was too captivated to listen. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the doors along the corridor creaked open, revealing a secret room that appeared on no map of the building. Inside, an altar covered in still-lit black candles and ritualistic symbols surrounded an antique mirror, whose surface seemed to move as it were water. Unwittingly, Thomas approached the mirror, drawn by a force he couldn't help understand. Reflected in the mirror, he didn't see his own face, but that of another person, a woman with intense eyes who stared at him with a gaze that transcended time. At that moment, he clearly heard the voice speaking to him through the mirror, asking him to free her. The couple later discovered that the woman in the mirror was a famous voodoo priestess from the 19th century, whose soul had been trapped in the mirror as part of a ritual gone wrong. Determined to free her, Thomas and Marie delved into the study of voodoo, seeking a way to break the spell. After weeks of research and rituals, they finally managed to break the bond that held the priestess bound to the mirror. After breaking the bond that held the ancient voodoo priestess prisoner in the mirror, Thomas and Marie realized too late the consequences of their actions. The liberation of the ancient lady did not bring the peace they had hoped for, but instead unleashed a new terror. The priestess, instead of finding rest, took possession of Marie's soul, changing her from that moment on. That very evening of the liberation, Marie, in a state of incomprehensible delirium, attempted to throw herself off the roof of the building. It was only thanks to the timely intervention of a neighbor who happened to be on the top floor, hanging laundry, that tragedy was averted. Marie screamed at the top of her lungs, claiming she could fly, showing clear signs of possession that no one could have anticipated. Her behavior was so alarming that there was no choice but to commit her to a psychiatric hospital. Her screams, her delusions, and her belief that she could fly left everyone speechless, unable to provide a rational explanation for what was happening. Thomas, devastated by what had happened and perhaps also afraid of the possible consequences, never revealed the truth about Marie. He didn't speak of the spiritual possession of the voodoo ritual they had conducted, allowing Marie to be treated as a madwoman, rather than as a victim of forces beyond human understanding. This choice was interpreted by many as an act of cowardice, and Thomas lived from that moment on with a deep sense of guilt. Marie, meanwhile, was transferred from one facility to another in a desperate attempt to find a cure for her condition. Her story became a mystery, a file lost among the papers of various psychiatric hospitals, and over time, information about her became increasingly scarce, until nothing more was known about her.